Story time about how my husband left me for my sister and married her 4 days later. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I'm sending me on Instagram. My husband and I have only been married for 2 years. 2 years ago, my sister and I went on vacation. A few days into our trip, we were at a bar and we met this group of guys. My husband was one of those guys. He basically flirted with us the whole time. And I could tell that he didn't know which one of us to choose. So I made it easy for him. I told him that I liked him and that I wanted him and I to go on a date. So that let my sister know that she had to back off. My sister actually ended up hooking up with one of his other friends that night. We all hung out together for the rest of the trip. I started falling in love with him really fast. When the vacation was over, my sister and I went back home. My future husband and I would basically talk on the phone every single day. A few weeks later, he even started talking about moving to my state. I really thought he was totally committing to me because he wanted to move closer to me. Fast forward a few months later, we moved in together. We got engaged and soon after we got married. My whole family was really happy for me and my sister was too. My sister ended up being my bridesmaid and everything was great. She and my fiance ended up spending a lot of time together. I mean, she was helping me plan the wedding and she was my bridesmaid, so I didn't think anything of it. Fast forward to a year later, I ended up landing a great job. This job had me traveling 2 times out of the week. My husband mostly worked from home. Because I'm such a good wife, I decided to ask my sister to go over to my house and cook for him once in a while. After a few weeks of working my new job, I decided to come home early and I didn't tell my husband. I found him with my sister in the jacuzzi. Part 2 is I walk into my husband and my sister sitting really close in the jacuzzi. Of course, they were both in their bathing suits. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. When they saw me, they basically jumped apart. I could tell they were startled. I stared at them without saying anything for a few seconds. I was angry. That's when my husband jumps out of the jacuzzi and comes to give me a big hug. Side note, he and I never used that jacuzzi. We basically never used it because he never wanted to clean it. And I had even told him that we should just sell it if that was the case. But of course, as soon as my sister comes over, he's willing to clean it so that they can use it together. My sister, of course, jumped out of the jacuzzi too, and she offered to serve me some dinner. And basically, I just told her she could leave. That's when she looked at me with her angry face, which I know very well, and she actually did leave. After that, I had a terrible, terrible feeling in my gut. I knew that something was up right away because they jumped apart really fast. They knew they got caught. Because I traveled so much, I knew that this was probably going to happen again. So I did the only logical thing. I bought a baby cam and synced it to my phone. It basically looked like a table decoration, but it recorded video and sound. I put it above the fireplace in our bedroom. And I also put one in the living room. Of course, my husband didn't notice one bit. What do you know? The same day I left on a trip, my sister shows up. The baby cam alerted me when there was movement in the house. Little did they know I was recording the whole thing, video and sound. Approximately 2 minutes after she came into the house, they started to kiss. By the way, I was on a train watching this all go down. I wanted to faint. Their faces were basically stuck to each other for 5 minutes. Part 3 is up. See my husband and my sister full-on kissing. It's as if their faces were stuck to each other for 5 minutes. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. They look so comfortable with each other, which led me to believe that this had started a long time ago. By the way, I'm watching all of this go down through my cell phone. I had installed a baby cam before I left on my next work trip. I recorded the entire thing. I knew they would both deny it unless I had physical proof. I was so enraged, I canceled my work trip. I got on a train back home. I was only 30 minutes away from my house. And yes, I was still watching them the whole time I was going home. I jumped into an Uber and had him drop me off a block away from my house. I didn't want them to know I was nearby. I opened the front door quietly and there they were on the couch, still stuck together. I grabbed my sister by the hair and pulled her over the couch. With the purse that was already in my hand, I started hitting my husband. He then pinned my arms down to my sides and told me to leave the house. You heard that right, he kicked me out. I went straight to my parents' house and showed them the video. Then my dad was so angry we actually ended up going back to my house. But of course my husband didn't let us in. Then he showed me the divorce papers. He told me if I didn't sign them that he would take all of my money, because ultimately I did make more money than him. My sister was standing behind him the whole time. My dad and I left, and I don't even know how this happened, but 4 days later they were married. Sister came to my parents' house and told them the news. We fully expected them to be happy for her. We even moved into the house that I basically paid for. Still haven't been able to get all of my things out. Should I go over there and grab my things? Should I sue him? What do you guys think I should do? P.S. My sister's pregnant. Story time about how I ghosted my boyfriend of 5 years. I know that sounds so bad, but he was a thief, a liar, and a cheater. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Like I said, my boyfriend and I have been together for 5 years. We met in college and were basically inseparable for the first 2 years. On our 3rd year of dating, I started working as a personal assistant for a big celebrity in LA. This meant I had to move to LA. You see, we lived in Texas at the time. Well, things got really bad after I moved. He wouldn't take my phone calls, he would totally ignore my text messages, and he would go out all the time. For the first few months, I tried to keep the peace so I wouldn't say anything. But eventually it got to the point where we wouldn't speak for an entire week. Luckily, my best friend still lived in Texas, so I had her follow him around for 2 days. And you'll never guess what she found. Shout out to my bestie. She showed up to his apartment early in the morning and waited for him to go to work, which he did. When he was done with work, she went back to his job to follow him back home. This is when she told me that he actually went to some girl's house. He didn't end up going home at all that day. This man actually spent the night at some girl's house. The whole time I was trying to call him and text him and he did not take my phone calls. My best friend even took pictures of his car in this girl's driveway. Since I had this girl's address actress, I looked her up on the internet. I even found out her phone number because I paid some service online. And of course, I found her Instagram account. She had been posting on her story about hanging out with some guy. But the thing is, she didn't show the guy's face. She only showed his hand. Guess what? I recognize his hand in the picture because he has a tattoo on his pinky. So of course, I took screenshots. Later that day, my best friend followed him to a bar. At this bar, he met up with another girl. Unfortunately, I didn't have any information about this girl. I just knew that she drove a green car. My best friend followed him again the following day. He went to the beach, ran some errands, and then met up with another girl. Yes, we have 3 girls in 2 days. This girl was different because this girl was a friend of mine when I lived in Texas. And I knew she always had a crush on him, but she could never admit it. They went out to dinner and then back to her place. And again, my best friend sent me pictures of everything, so I had all the receipts. Side note, I think of my best friend spying on him and it makes me laugh. I hope you can all say you have best friends that are like that. So here's what I did. I got on the first flight back to Texas and did not tell my boyfriend that I was showing up at his apartment the following day. But guess what I find in his bed? Part 2 is up. Story time about how I ghosted my boyfriend of 5 years. I show up to my boyfriend's apartment to catch him in the act, and you'll never guess what I found in his bed. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. My lying, cheating boyfriend had given me a key to his apartment. So I unlock the apartment and make my way towards his bedroom, really quietly. When I walk into his bedroom, I find him curled up in his bed with another girl. He's holding her in his arms, totally fast asleep. The worst part is, I recognize the girl that was with him. It was one of the girls who I used to be friends with in Texas. I walked backwards and closed the door behind me. That's when I just started to cry. I couldn't believe that he had done this to me. While I was working my butt off in LA trying to make a future for us, he was in Texas dating 3 women at once. No wonder he never picked up my phone calls or even texted me back. So here's what I did. I had printed out all the receipts I had, all the pictures of him hanging out with other girls that my best friend took while she was spying on him. I laid out all the pictures on his kitchen counter, and I left him a letter too. I told him in the letter that I could never forgive him and for him to never contact me again. Oh yeah, and that I wanted him to pay me back the $3,000 he owed me. You see, when we first started dating, he needed a loan for his car. I helped him out and gave him $3,000, which he promised to pay me. Obviously, we dated for 5 years and I never saw any of that money. So aside from him being a cheater and a liar, he was a thief. I left the note and the cards and left his apartment. I went to my parents' house and stayed with him for the weekend. Of course, my boyfriend, ex, showed up to my parents' house and begged to talk to me. My father told him to leave me alone and to never speak to me again. My dad told him that when he was ready to pay him the money. That made me laugh. I was totally crushed. I blocked him on everything, even through email. Of course, he got on someone else's phone and tried to contact me that way, but I never replied. He sends me emails every now and then and promises to pay me the money back. A few days ago, he sent me a picture of an engagement ring. He keeps telling me that I'm the best thing that he's ever had, that he's sorry and blah, blah, blah. I kind of want to reply to him, but I know that that's a bad idea, right? Or should I just talk to him and see what he has to say? What do you guys think? Story time about how my ex broke into my apartment and trashed my entire apartment and ruined every single thing that I owned. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. I'm not gonna lie, my relationship with my ex is terribly toxic. We actually met each other on a dating app, I know. He was absolutely charming on the first date. Second date, not so much. And third date, he was absolutely awful. But I just started falling in love with him, like literally from the moment I met him. I had it in my head that I was gonna make him a good boyfriend. Like me. I seriously, honestly thought that he would change and just become a better guy. He quickly wanted to be exclusive, but did not want to call me his girlfriend. Oh, and he would get jealous about every little single thing. If I wanted to go out with friends, he would get upset. If I didn't answer my phone or text him right away, he would get upset. Mind you, this whole time, he doesn't want to call me his girlfriend. I work as a stylist, but I also model on the side just for some money. Well, he hated this. A week into dating or whatever we were, he told me that I needed to quit modeling. If I didn't quit modeling, that meant that I was for the streets. Because, you know, all models are for the streets. Like the idiot I am, I started passing up on jobs. I even passed up on a Sephora campaign. My modeling agency was really upset. In my mind, I thought, you know, if I do what he wants, he'll be a good boyfriend. And maybe we can call each other boyfriend and girlfriend. My mom kept insisting that she wanted to meet him, but he said no. Now, when he told me that he didn't want to meet my mom, trust me, I put my foot down. I told him there was absolutely no way I could be in a relationship with anybody who did not want to meet my family. He told me that I was taking things way too seriously. That's when I threw it in his face that he acts like a jealous boyfriend, but still doesn't want to call me his girlfriend. So he explained to me that any girl he talks to has to be only for him. And even if he's not dating you, you still have to be only for him. Then he told me that he was dating 2 other girls. I had a suspicion, but I never thought he would actually admit it to me. I told him that we needed a break and that I didn't want to see him for a few weeks. This made him insanely jealous. He told me that I was a liar and that I was probably hooking up with someone else the whole time I was with him. And yes, I did try to convince him that I wasn't, but he was not having it. I just moved into my new apartment, which I absolutely love. Spent over $3,000 decorating it. I even got CB2 furniture. I made the mistake of giving him a key a few weeks ago. One day I come home from a modeling job and my apartment is completely trashed. Part 2 is up. I walk into my apartment to find it trashed. At first I thought I had been robbed, but that's when it hit me. It was my ex. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. The walls in my apartment were smeared with chocolate. There was literally broken glass in the entryway, so I could have stepped in glass. All the mirrors were shattered and broken. My television was on the floor, completely smashed, and there was a hammer right next to my TV. This man took a hammer and smashed my television. He did the same thing to my expensive Vitamix blender. All of my makeup was in the toilet. And yes, there was poo in the toilet too. The sink was full of kitchen condiments where he put all of my expensive perfumes. The bathroom mirror was also smashed. My expensive ass CB2 couch was full of mustard and honey. All of my couch cushions had olive oil on them. I mean, the list goes on and on. I pulled out my phone and started taking picture and video. I called the police and my parents came right away. Of course, I called my ex and told him that I knew it was him, and he denied everything. He said, and I quote, "You're crazy," and then hung up. The cop that came to my apartment was super rude. He said that I must have done something really bad in order to deserve this kind of punishment. I filed a police report and they told me that I could sue him. So far, he does not want to pay a single dime. He then admitted to me through text messages that he got the idea from a TikTok video, and that some other guy had done this to his ex. So far, I've spent $500 just in cleaning services to clean my apartment. I'm living back with my parents. Luckily, a judge made him pay me $5,000. Still not enough. He's been calling me and begging me to get back with him. What do I freaking do?
Story time about the girl next door. So around the time I lived in New York with my sister and dad, across the street there was a girl. I never knew her name, but she was really pretty. I had to be 11 and her herself maybe 15, 16. I was always playing outside, and ever so often she came out to take a baby for a stroll. Back then it never really occurred to me that she was a teen mom. Truthfully, I thought that baby was her little sister. And the baby would cry all the time, and she could never get the baby to quiet down. The guy she lived with, which I believe was her dad, would get mad at her when she couldn't quiet the baby down. There was a particular night after 4th of July, the baby was crying, and again, she couldn't get the baby to stop crying. At that time, I was outside jumping rope, and I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was scared that something happened to the baby, but come back for part 2 so I can tell you guys what happened. Part 2 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the baby was crying, and in the middle of the night, I heard a slap and a pound against the door, and the baby stopped crying. I was afraid that something had happened to the baby, so I ran across the street, and I listened to the sounds behind the front door. The guy that lived there had opened the door, and I fell into the house. He yelled at me saying, "What are you doing on my property?" When I got up and I looked up, the baby was on the ground, and the girl had bruises on her face. I told him I was sorry, and I asked what happened to the baby. He yelled at me, telling me to get out, and the girl got up to pick the baby up, and the baby started crying again. I got scared and ran back across the street. And the next day, the man came back and knocked on my door. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of the girl that lived next door. So like I said, the man came back and knocked on my door. My sister had answered, and he asked my dad, but around that time my dad wasn't home, so he just left. From then on, I was kind of afraid of going outside because I was afraid that the man was going to see me, so for a whole week I never came out. When I finally decided to go out, I asked my sister to come with me and play jump rope. While we were outside playing jump rope, our neighbors across the street, second floor, blinds opened, and I looked up because the blinds are never open. As we were looking, the words "help me" were on the window, and which appeared to be written in red lipstick. We got scared and told our dad, and my dad immediately called the police, but after the police visited, they told my dad that there wasn't anyone in there. No baby, no girl, just a man living across the street. He said maybe we were seeing things or reading things wrong. It gets really bad after this. Come back for part 4. Part 4 about the girl that lived across the street. I think maybe a month after the incident, I stopped seeing the girl and I stopped hearing the baby. And I kind of stopped thinking about them for a while. I thought maybe her and her little sister moved with their mom and left the guy who I thought which was their dad. I'd say that next year I finally saw the girl, but this time she was much skinnier. She had came up to me and asked me if I seen her daughter. I said no, and she walked away. I was confused at first because I didn't know that baby was hers. Then years later, it was my prom night. Before I took a step out of my house, I seen out my window that an entire police SWAT team came to arrest my neighbor. Then they went into the house, and there were multiple girls. Had to be like 8 of them coming out of his house, and some of the girls looked really weak. Lastly, there was a little girl and she had to be like 6, 7, and I thought it was crazy, like how did all those girls get in there? To this day, I wonder what happened to the girl next door and if she ever found her baby. Am I wrong for breaking up my best friend's relationship with her boyfriend? Some people may say it was petty, but I think it was justice. So my best friend at the time, which we're going to call Coco, had a boyfriend and we're going to call him Nick. They met in high school their junior year and they were together for about like 2 years. Nick was seriously in love with Coco. He would literally do everything for her. Honestly, Nick was like her little puppet. Honestly, throughout the relationship, I felt as though Coco really didn't respect Nick. I mean, the things that he did for her, I wish a man would do for me. And I just really felt like she didn't really appreciate him. If I was in a relationship with Nick, the relationship would have been mutual. I seriously believe that Nick deserved better because Coco wouldn't do anything. She literally added no value to the relationship, but Nick, he would buy her things, took her shopping, went on dates, went on trips, and Coco had nothing to show for it. So I made a plan to steal her man. And in the next part, I'll tell you exactly why I decided to make that choice. Part 2 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So, like I said, the relationship between Coco and Nick wasn't mutual. Coco seriously did not deserve him. In the process of their entire relationship, Coco was cheating on Nick. And as a best friend, I tried to keep it cordial, but I just didn't like how Nick was getting treated, especially with all the things that he was doing for her. And you won't even believe the person that she was cheating on Nick with. My crush. And she knew that was my crush. She tried to hide the fact that she was talking to him, but I ended up finding out through mutual friends. I never confronted Coco about it because I just wanted to see if she would be honest with me. But for weeks, she never did. So one day I decided to go to Nick's house and I practically told him what it was. At first he didn't believe me, but then once he realized me out of all people would come to him about the situation, he understood and felt heartbroken. So we created a plan to hurt Coco. Come back for part 3. Part 3 on why I decided to steal my best friend's man. So, like I said, I went to his house and told him that Coco was cheating on him. And all necessary, I really don't know what Coco was doing with my crush, but I heard from other people that she was talking to him. And honestly, that was enough information for me. And we decided to plan a romantic sneaky link and invite her an hour later. In the process of us doing this, I didn't expect anything to happen, but it did. And I don't know if he expected anything to happen that night, but he practically ended up cheating on Coco with me. Later that night, when she finally arrived, Nick told her she actually needed to go home and that he was busy doing something, even though he invited her to come over. He felt something was off, so she ran upstairs to his bedroom, which was where I was. When she saw me, she yanked me by my hair and pulled me out of the bed. And the rest was history. I ended up finding out 2 weeks later after that incident, the only reason why she was talking to my crush was to get him with me. This Storytime is from a follower, and she really needs advice. By the way, we're calling her Kalani. Kalani is 17 years old, and she just got out of a 2-year relationship. About 2 months later, after the relationship ended, she thought she was ready to get back out there. Her friends convinced her to get on a dating app, and they made a profile for her. Occasionally, she'll go on the app and talk to a couple people, but nothing would ever work. In her settings, she made herself available to guys all over the world, but until recently, she decided to change it to her city. As she was swiping through, she came across a profile that looked like her dad. She was honestly shocked, so she clicked on the page, and everything about him was him. His age, where he worked, where he lived. For a moment, she thought maybe this could be a fake page. Then she digged more into his profile and seen pictures that she's never seen before. She doesn't know if she should confront her dad or tell her mom. Give her some advice down below. Or please. This Storytime is from a follower, and he really needs advice. So we're going to go ahead and call him Junior, and Junior is 21 years old. Junior has a medical condition which keeps him from working a regular job. His family supports him. They pay for his rent, they pay for his travels, and they pay for his education. And Junior is gay. He said he's known since he was 12. He said that he has a boyfriend and they've been together for 3 years, which, by the way, we're going to call Drake. Drake has never met Junior's parents, and now he's getting a bit anxious, and he said that he's tired of being kept a secret. Drake has been getting distant, and he doesn't know how long he can stay in a relationship while being hidden. Steven said the only reason why he hides Drake is because his family is very homophobic, and he's afraid that his family might cut him off. He's afraid that he might become homeless, and he doesn't want anyone else trying to take care of him. But he's afraid keeping him a secret might make him lose Drake. Please comment down below, or please make us. This story time is from a follower, and she seriously needs help. We're going to call her Aliana, and she's between the ages of 19 to 24 years old. So, Aliana has a daughter, and the child's father, which we're going to call Kobe, are co-parenting. Ever since she gave birth to their daughter, Kobe has been dismissing her about everything. He constantly questions her about everything that she does, and she said it gives her really bad anxiety. He can be mean at times, and as of recently, Kobe had her under the impression that he opened up a credit card with their daughter's social security card without talking to her about it. When she expressed to him that she really didn't appreciate that, his response is, "She's my daughter. I don't have to run anything by you or anyone else. I'm going to do whatever I want." And it's been like that for every situation. She's trying to get some respect out of him as the mother of his child. At this point, she'd really rather him be a deadbeat than a father at all if this is what she has to deal with. She's cried to her family about it, but they really don't know what to do. Please comment down below some advice or make
Story time about how I caught my roommate with my fiance 3 days ago. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My fiance and I have been together for 3 years. He took me on a trip last January and proposed. He's been nothing but an amazing fiance. Families get along super well. My family loves him and he's so kind and gracious to them. On the other hand, my roommate is terrible. He claims to be a model on Instagram, but that's not really what she does. She's actually got a couple of sweet puppies, if you know what I mean. In the past, I've helped her out so much with money because she's always broke. I even loaned her $2,000 just last month to repair her car. My family hates her and they think she's super toxic. I have a soft spot for her because we know each other since high school and I know that she struggled a lot then. I'm a very kind and giving person, but she's totally taken advantage of that. Funnily enough, my fiance hated my roommate when he first met her. He thought the same thing my family did. She constantly monopolized my time, and if I was out on a date with my fiance, if she needed something, she would call me and ask me to go to the supermarket and pick up apples and stuff like that. About 2 months ago, I had to put my foot down. I'm in the process of planning my wedding with one of my best friends, and my roommate is totally stressing me out. She continues to criticize every single thing that I pick. I asked her to be one of my bridesmaids, huge mistake, and she made a fuss about the dress. She wanted a backless dress, but I didn't want that for my bridesmaids at all. I'm not trying to plan an Instagram wedding here. She was so upset about the bridesmaid dress that she actually didn't speak to me for about a week. I had to beg for her to talk to me. Eventually, she told me that she didn't feel sexy in the dress and that she really wanted something she could shine in. My best friend was with us when she told me that, so my best friend quickly corrected her and told me that the only person that needed to be shining that day was me, because I'm the bridesmaid. My roommate got super upset and told me that she didn't want my best friend coming over to our apartment anymore. Obviously, that was going to be a huge no because she was helping me plan the wedding. So instead, I had to get my fiance to come to the apartment and help me out. My fiance works a lot and he's constantly on his phone. He also travels for work a lot, so I knew that he wasn't going to be able to help me all the time. One day, I come home from work and find my fiance and my roommate sitting on the couch chatting. I actually got really happy because I thought maybe they're trying to be friends now. I wanted them to get along. My fiance and I knew that we were going to move in together right after the wedding, so I didn't have a problem with them becoming friends. Fast forward to 4 days ago. My fiance had his bachelor party and I had my bachelorette party. I had so much fun at my party. My roommate was on her best behavior, but she actually told me that she needed to leave early, which I thought was super strange. I get home from my party at around 3 a.m. I was wondering about my fiance, so I decided to call him. The phone goes directly to voicemail. A few minutes later, I get a message from one of his friends. It's a picture of my fiance and my roommate on the couch kissing. Then I get a phone call from the guy that sent me the picture. He told me he thought I needed to know what was going on. He told me that my roommate showed up to my fiance's bachelor party and that she was flirting with him the whole night. He also told me that she was pressuring my fiance to drink. My fiance has never been a big drinker, so it surprised me that he was even drinking at all. He sent me some more pictures of my fiance and my roommate. They were dancing and chatting the whole night. So I decided to show up to the bachelor party unannounced. When I walk in, there they are on the couch. Fiance was pretty inebriated and he was kind of confused too. My roommate, on the other hand, was totally fine. She jumped up from the couch and asked me what I was doing there. I asked her, "What are you doing here?" She actually laughed and told me that my fiance invited her. Part 2 is up. That's when I find my fiance and my roommate sitting on the couch together really snug. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Unfortunately, I did not find them kissing or anything. I asked my roommate what she was doing there. She laughed and told me that my fiance invited her. My fiance was totally out of it since he had been drinking. That's when I pull up my phone and show them the picture of them kissing. They both start to deny it, but I'm like, how can you deny it? I have proof. My roommate told me that she needed to leave and she literally ran away. I actually had to wait for my fiance to sober up for a few hours before he could actually talk. That's when he told me he didn't remember anything. My roommate is refusing to speak to me and told me that she doesn't want to be in the wedding anymore. And I'm like, yeah, of course you're not. The only thing she said was that my fiance came on to her. My family hates him and her now. Parents don't want me to get married, but the wedding is a week away. My fiance swears that she did something to him. He's begging me for forgiveness and I don't know what to do. Please help. Storytime about how my blind date robbed my apartment. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime, it was sent to me on Instagram. Recently broke up with my ex who was really abusive. I was so depressed after the breakup. Even worse, my ex got back with his ex-girlfriend right after we broke up. And to top it all off, he started posting her right away and announced their engagement. I decided I wouldn't let the depression get to me. Signed up to some dating apps and started going on dates. My first date was okay. The guy was pretty shy and quiet, but he was trying to rush things, if you know what I mean, and I was not having that. My second date was okay. The only problem was that his breath smelled really bad and I just couldn't get past that. Then I went on to the third date. This one was different though. One of my coworkers mentioned a guy that she knew who was single. She showed him my Instagram and he fell in love, according to my coworker. The only problem was he didn't have any pictures on his Instagram, so I couldn't tell what he looked like. My friend described him though, and she made him sound really attractive. We meet up for a dinner date at a really nice restaurant, and yep, he was super attractive. He literally looked like a male model. I felt totally out of my league, but I thought, whatever, just go for it. We talked for 2 hours and had a great time. At the end of the date, he offered to drop me off back at my place so that I wouldn't have to take an Uber. I agreed, and when we got to my place, I invited him in. Biggest mistake of my life. Oh, I forgot to mention, I earn a pretty good living, so I have a nice apartment and nice things. When he came into my apartment, he kept talking about how pretty everything was. He kept saying things like, wow, that must have been really expensive. He even asked me how much I paid for my rug. Went to the bathroom and left him alone. When I came out, he said he had to leave. Basically ran away. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my blind date robbed my apartment. After my date ran out of my apartment, I got a really bad feeling. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. I decided to send him a message and ask him if he was okay. And he gave me a really weak excuse. He said he needed to go home to get some work done. I knew that he was totally lying. Fortunately, I didn't check my apartment to see if anything was gone. Instead, I went to the gym, got home, and went straight to bed. Texted my coworker letting her know how the date went. When I told her it was weird the way he ran away from my house, she told me that she had heard he kind of had some weird behavior in the past, and I asked her what kind of weird behavior. That's when she told me she knew his ex, and that she had accused him of being a con man. I had to laugh it off because I just couldn't believe that I knew someone who was like that. I went to sleep, and unfortunately, I sleep with earplugs, so I can't hear what's going on. I also use a sleep mask over my eyes, so I can't see if there's any light. By the way, I do live by myself. I wake up the next morning, open my bedroom door, only to see that my stuff is gone. My television was gone, my laptop, my vacuum, even my kitchen appliances like my blender and a toaster. I ran to my purse and my wallet was also gone. I had a beautiful Cartier watch on my dining table, that was gone too, and weirdly enough, so was my rug. I instantly knew that it had to be him. Ran over to the front door of my apartment, and I noticed that my backup keys were gone. I had them hanging on a hook by the door the night before, and I hadn't noticed that it was gone after he left. No wonder he ran out of my apartment. Called the police and they arrived within a few minutes. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my blind date robbed my apartment. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. As soon as I realized I had been robbed, I called the cops. Came over and checked everything. Told them the backup keys for my apartment were missing and that I knew who had taken them. Gave them all the information that I knew about my blind date. That's when it dawned on me that I had the Ring doorbell. I got all the footage from my phone and I showed it to them. And there it was, plain as day. The same guy I had gone on a date with the night before was on my Ring doorbell stealing all of my stuff. He didn't even bother to change his clothes. The video shows him using my key that he stole from my apartment to open my door at 3 a.m. It only took him 15 minutes to steal everything he wanted. Scariest part though was that we saw him walk over to my bedroom door. It was like he was debating whether or not to open my door. And if you're wondering if anyone else saw him, no. My apartment is pretty secluded. My front door leads to the street, so he had easy access and a quick way to get out. I tell my coworker everything and she begins to cry and apologizes for having introduced me to him. She said that she had no idea. The cops even went and questioned her about it. They thought they might have both been in on it, but I never thought that. 4 days after the robbery, the cops come back to my house. That's when they told me he had a really shady history. He had been in jail several times for robbery and a bunch of other things. His ex even reached out to me. She told me he stole all of her things and her money, and that he had been stalking her for weeks. They finally arrested him but let him out on bail. It's crazy to me that this guy is still on the street. I'm debating whether or not to move to a different apartment. I'm so scared of this guy. What do you guys think I should do? I'm so afraid.
I never meant to make it by myself. Stuck between the ego and the devil and yourself. Got these habits but I'll never ask for help. Just following my feelings cause I love the way you felt. I can give you love and you can give you time. You can make you smile and I will make you cry. The only things in common when we talk about the past. I will be your first and he will be the last. Now you think about him when you're kissing me now. Feeling like you're slipping away. There's no doubt good in the word goodbye, but there's so much more to stay. So blame it all on me, darling. See I let you down. Blame it all on me, darling. See I'm never around.
Storytime about how I found my mother's stalker living underneath her bed. My mother and father divorced shortly after I was born. My mom has raised me all on her own, so her and I are extremely close. I would do anything for my mother. Back in the 90s, my mom became a somewhat successful model. She did runway shows and campaign ads. She began dating a photographer when I was about 8 years old. But something about him just rubbed me the wrong way. He was very controlling of my mother and always wanted to know where she was. This was a time before cell phones, and everywhere she would go, he would always end up being there. A few months into the relationship, my mother decided to break up with him. He threatened her and told her that he would make her regret it. He began calling our house at midnight, throwing rocks at my mom's window. One morning, my mom woke up to a knife in her tire. He really was trying to make her regret it. This is when my mom realized that we needed to move away and get away from him. We moved to Atlanta and my mom began getting more modeling work. She started earning more and we moved into a big, beautiful house. It had 2 floors, a basement, and a huge garden. We loved the house. Soon after we moved in, I started noticing some weird things. Sometimes windows would be wide open when I got home from school, as well as random items in the garden. I came home from school one day and went to my mom's room. That's when I found a man's boot underneath her bed and her window wide open. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I found my mother's stalker living underneath her bed. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. After I found the boot under my mom's bed and her window wide open, I told her. My mom began to cry and was really scared. By the way, I was 12 at this time. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My mom went around the house, locking all the windows and doors. She told me if I ever saw anything like that again to call the cops. I could tell she was really scared and this terrified me. Every day after school, I would go straight to my mom's room and check underneath her bed. And weirdly enough, I started finding random items. One day, I found a pocket watch. A few days later, I found a handkerchief. And that continued for about a month. Mom and I decided to call the cops and give them all the items that we'd found. The cops told my mom there was nothing they could do because there was no physical harm done to her or me. Later that night, I wake up to my mom screaming. The house was dark and I ran down the hallway. Suddenly, a dark figure walks out of my mom's room. The black figure looked at me and walked away. I was frozen and couldn't move. The cops asked my mom what the man did. She said that when she woke up, she saw him standing in the corner of the room dressed in black with a black mask, and that all he did was stare at her. When she asked him what he wanted, he told her, "You." The cops tried to convince my mom that it was probably a robbery. She told them about her ex and they said it was probably nothing and to just forget about it. A few days later, I come home from school and check underneath my mom's bed. There I found a handwritten note. You'll never guess what it said. It was terrifying. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I found my mother's stalker living underneath her bed. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Under my mom's bed, I found her handwritten note from her stalker. I couldn't bring myself to read it. I gave it to my mom and she read it. She cried and told me to pack a bag. That night, we went to sleep at a hotel and the cops came to check our house. The cops said they found nothing in the house and it was safe for us to come back. 2 days later, I decided to come home from school early. But I knew that my mom wouldn't be home and I would be all alone. When I walked up to the house, I noticed my mom's bedroom window was open. I walked slowly up the stairs and swung the door open, and that's when I saw a man's foot sticking out from underneath my mom's bed. When he heard me open the door, he pulled his foot in. I screamed so loud and closed the door behind me and started running down the stairs. That's when I heard him open the door. I could hear his footsteps behind me as I ran down the stairs. As he ran down the stairs, he tripped and fell. I could hear him yelling in pain. I ran straight to the neighbor's house. She already knew about the break-in and believed me right away. She called the cops and my mother. Her husband decided to go check the house, but when he came back, he said there was nothing there. When I told him that he fell down the stairs, the cops thought he might be in the hospital if he injured himself. And there they found a man dressed in black. That's when the man told the cops that he was my mother's boyfriend and that he came to visit us. They thankfully arrested him. When they showed my mom the man's mugshot, she recognized him right away as her ex. Turns out he had been breaking into our house for over a month, and he would sleep there every night underneath my mom. He was in prison for 10 years but got out last year. My mother and I live in fear.
If you're you're alone right now, don't watch this video. In the winter of 2018, a man who was living alone in the mountains wakes up to find a red ball sitting on his front yard. He assumed the only neighbor he had must have kids, and so he kicks the ball over the fence, goes inside, doesn't think anything of it. That night, he wakes up to the sound of kids laughing outside of his window. He goes outside to check on them because it's the middle of the night, and there's no kids anywhere, but that red ball is back on his property. So he picks it up, brings it in his house, and goes back to bed. The next morning, he goes over to his neighbor's house to let them know that their kids were out in his yard in the middle of the night. But it turns out his neighbor is just some old man who lives alone, and there aren't any kids anywhere in the area. That night, he wakes up again to the sound of kids on his property, and when he looks outside, there's no kids, but that red ball is back on his property. Panicked, he runs downstairs to make sure the one he brought in is still inside, and it's gone. He checked every window and door, and everything was still locked. It didn't make any sense. He decides to look out the window one more time, and off in the distance is some weird stiff figure watching him.
This is why you should never Google yourself. Some of us might have done it once or twice, but for Anora Petrova, one simple search led to horrifying consequences. Anora had always wanted to be an ice skater. She was young, talented, successful, and had a famous trainer. The night before her first big championship win, she felt more anxious than usual. For fun, she Googled herself and came across a Wikipedia page saying that she would win. When she did win, Anora thought this must be a coincidence. But every time after that, the page would predict whether she won or lost. She checked it every single time, almost addicted to refreshing that site. When she was about to compete in another huge competition, she decided to manipulate the website by changing the outcome it predicted. But instead, it said Anora Petrova is going to get what she deserves. Right after, she was accused of sabotaging another girl's skates, which ended up slicing her in the forehead. Even though Anora denied it, she was banned from the competition and was dropped by her trainer. She thought this must be the worst of it until she checked the website the next day and saw a terrifying message about her. Follow for part 2 of the story.
Ever wonder what would happen if you stopped sleeping? During World War II, the Russians wanted to find a way to keep their soldiers awake longer. So they came up with this awful experiment where they took prisoners of war, put them in a gas chamber, and then exposed them to experimental drugs to see how long they could keep them awake for. Initially, the drugs seemed great. The first 4 days, the subjects were agitated, but were normal. By day 5, they stopped interacting with each other and began acting extremely paranoid. On day 9, one of the subjects screamed for so long that he tore his vocal cord. On day 14, they started eating themselves. When they turned off the gas on day 15, all of the subjects began screaming in pain, begging for them to turn the gas back on. When they didn't, they all fell asleep and died.
This is why you should never talk to strangers in an elevator. One day, a surgeon was working the night shift at a hospital. He just finished his operation on a patient and was going to the basement. He entered the elevator and there was one other woman already inside. They were casually chatting when the elevator door opened and another woman was about to enter. But the surgeon looked horrified. He quickly slammed the close button and punched the highest floor of the building. Surprised, the woman asked why he was being so rude and wouldn't let the other woman in the elevator with them. The surgeon explained that in this hospital, all patients wear white wristbands with their names printed on them, but the red wristbands are placed on all of the corpses. The surgeon then looks to the woman in the elevator with him and says, "That was the same woman I just operated on. She died on the operating table. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman in the elevator with him just smiled, raised her arm, and said, "You mean like this one?" This is why you should never go for someone's looks. Once there was a man who married a woman with long black hair and brown eyes. He thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, but soon things went terribly wrong. Over the years, her appearance changed, but he couldn't handle it. He didn't like that she gained weight or that her face now had wrinkles on it. For that reason, he quickly divorced her and found a different girl. This would be a horrifying mistake. The new girl was much younger and had long blonde hair. Within weeks, he married her, but as soon as they moved in, he noticed that she completely changed. She wasn't sweet and polite anymore. She became rude and used him for money. One night, he couldn't take it anymore. He got in his car, left the city, and drove back to his ex-wife's house. And what he saw there shocked him. The house was abandoned. He knocked on the door, but no one answered, so he went in. And there, sitting in their old bedroom, was his ex-wife with her long black hair covering her face. He hugged her and cried, explaining how he regretted leaving her. And that's when she said, "I'm glad you're back, if only for a moment." The man said, "What do you mean? I'm back for good. We can spend our lives together." Then he brushed her hair out of her face and screamed. All that's left was a skull. That's when the man looked down and realized he'd been holding nothing but a pile of bones in his hands.
Story time of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. My older sister never really liked me as a child. We were never close. I never knew why, but I was guessing it was because of the 10-year age gap. But I'm pretty sure she hated me because she couldn't even look me in the eye. I cannot make this up. She would not look me in the eye. But she never really talked to my parents either. She kind of just kept to herself all the time. Sometimes I have vivid memories of when we were younger and she would always be arguing with my parents about something, and I always thought it had something to do with me. Well, I was right. It had everything to do with me because eventually my sister turned 18 and she moved out. For 2 years, I didn't talk to her at all. I honestly don't even think I had her number saved, and I'm pretty sure that she didn't have mine. Well, 2 years later, and I was 10 at the time, she reached out to me via social media. I'm not sure how she found my Instagram name, but it was just my name, so she probably just typed that in and found me. She DM'd me and told me that she wanted to talk about something very important and that she would like to talk over the phone. So we exchanged numbers and we called that same night. And she told me that when she was younger, my dad had taken advantage of her and gotten her pregnant. This is part 2 of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. So like I said, my older sister had reached out to me via social media and told me that she was actually my mother. And so after we got off the phone that same night, I lost it at dinner and I went off on my parents and I screamed at them. And I told them that I would go to the police and tell them everything and I would tell them the truth unless they just let me live with my older sister. And they tried to explain themselves, and their reasoning was that they wanted to keep the family together because of their traditional values. And it would have just made their lives a lot harder going through all the court proceedings, so they just kept the family together. And so they clearly didn't want me going to the police, so they said that I could go live with my older sister. So she came to get me, but she lived in a different state, so it kind of took a while. I still had to stay in the house for like a week or so before she came, but I packed all my stuff and I was ready to go. And when we went back to where she lived, we immediately called the police and told them everything. Fast forward a little bit, they did some DNA testing. My sister's DNA matched as my biological mother's, and then my dad was my biological father, and they saw how the ages just didn't match properly, so they took my father to jail.
If you ever see a random staircase in the woods, you have to get away as fast as you can. Never climb them.
There was a story going around a couple years ago stating that there are abandoned staircases in national forests around the world, like deep in the forest away from anybody. It's just a staircase, no other structure attached to it. Some stairs are in ruins, some are perfectly sturdy, some are iron spirals like the kind you'd find in a lighthouse, and they literally just reach up to nowhere. And there are so many different theories as to why these stairs are there and what actually happens when you climb them.
Only a few have ever dared to climb the staircases, and the people who have report feeling unnerved and unwelcome or even nauseous when they're up on the stairs.
Some people say the stairs lead to another dimension, other people say it leads to hell. Others say that's why so many people and kids go missing in national forests, because they climb these stairs and they're never seen.
This is why you should never Google yourself. Anora Petrova became obsessed with constantly refreshing a website that predicted whether or not she would win her ice skating competitions. But things took an extreme turn when she decided to manipulate the website's predictions by editing it herself. This caused her to be banned from the competition and be dropped by her trainer. But things got so much worse when she refreshed the page again and saw a terrifying message about her. This time it said she would be an orphan. She immediately called her parents, but she only heard maniacal laughter over the phone. After her parents died of a terrible accident, the police said that there were no records of her calls to her parents at all. She became reclusive after that and moved to another country, where she tried to reinvent herself. Eventually, she stopped checking the website and things went back to normal, until she wanted to audition for the Ice Circus. She checked the website again to see whether or not she would make it, but it only said one thing. It said, at midnight, Anora Petrova died friendless and alone. The next day, her body was found next to her computer.
I made my teacher cry. Story time. When I was in 2nd grade, I had this teacher and she was the devil, and we're gonna name her Miss Jackson. And the reason I call her a devil is because she would say really mean things to me to my face. She would be like, Ty, stop talking like that, you sound like a little girl. Or, your favorite color can't be pink, you have to choose one of the boy colors. And since I was so young, I didn't understand how serious these things were, and I didn't know I can get her in trouble. And I would go home sad like every single day. Eventually my mom noticed and she asked me what was wrong. So I told her some of the things that Miss Jackson would say to me, and my mom was mad. And my mom was like, the next time she says something to you, say something rude back, and if you get in trouble, I'll handle her from there. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. Now, Miss Jackson was a heavy lady, so I knew if I said something rude to her, it would be about her weight. Though we don't body shame around here. We don't do that, okay? So I'm in school eating lunch with my friends who happen to be girls, and Miss Jackson comes up to me and she's like, shouldn't you be eating with the boys? So I looked at her and I was like, shouldn't you be eating a salad? And the lunchroom started laughing, and then she started crying.